Welcome to the latest episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. It's time for Sign of the Times, Prince's double album masterpiece from 1987. On this episode, we'll be talking about the album's opener, the title track, Sign of the Times. For the first time on the show, I will be joined by two guest hosts, podcast regular Laura Tiebert and podcast newcomer Alex Hahn. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad to have you both on. This is, like I said, uncharted territory for me on the show to have two guests at the same time. I think it'll go really well, and this is kind of the song to do it, in my opinion. It's a really socially conscious type of song, something new that Prince hadn't really done a whole lot of, at least not to this level of depth, in my opinion. And it's a very key track off of one of Prince's key albums, I think. Most people would cite Sign of the Times as one of his most memorable, one of their favorites, just a very standout album in his discography. It's very long discography. So I think this is going to be a really, really cool episode, and I'm excited to have you both on. So Laura, listeners should know you by now, as you've been on for many, a year at least, if not more, ever since the Dirty Mind album. So they already know you. Alex, this is your first time on the show, so if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and maybe providing a little bit of a background as to your history with Prince and maybe more specifically your history with this song, if you have any notable memories you wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Jason. So my own background is I've written two books about Prince. The most recent one was written with Laura, which was called The Rise of Prince, 1958 to 1988. It was a total collaboration between the two of us, which we sort of started. The impetus of it was after Prince, so untimely passed away. We sort of got together and pulled this book together in relatively short order, quite short order. And so that was, great experience. And in terms of people that want to know more about sort of what I'm doing in upcoming projects, and to some extent Laura as well, we have a Facebook group called Make the House Shake. So if you want to look for that on Facebook, we will, I have ongoing updates about sort of what I'm doing, and I think Laura's going to be updating people on various of her endeavors too. So that would be awesome to visit us there. If you want to know more, because I do have another book that's in process. It's been in process for a while. So that's sort of what my background and history is, relative to Prince. Of course, there's so much more to that, but that's sort of as far as like my sort of quasi-professional avocations, that's pretty much what it is. Okay,
great. And so do you have any memories about listening to this song or hearing the song back when it came out that you want to share?
Yeah. Well, so I suggested this idea of kind of, did you want to ask us about, our first sort of memory of the song? And it just struck me, the reason for that me suggesting that is, at least with some of Prince's songs, I have very distinct memories. So, I guess I do certainly have distinct memories of hearing certain Prince songs for the first time. And, I think we all associate, sort of having memories of a specific time and a place, often when it's something, tragic. We all remember sort of where we were when 9/11 occurred. For that matter, we all remember where we were when Prince died. But, much more benignly, just sort of the gravity and sort of the intensity of a lot of Prince's songs, I do have, sort of similar recollections of, where was I, what was I doing when I first heard a song. I mean, and I'll get to Sign of the Times. My story on Kiss, I think, is more memorable because I was in college, and I was shaving. No, I think I was brushing my teeth using like an electric toothbrush, which is rather noisy. But there was music playing in the background, and I heard, some sort of weird, unusual sound. I had no idea it was Prince, but I'm like, what the fuck is that? Because it just sounded so unusual. And I came out and then could hear, that it was Prince and everything. But it was just like so shocking because the production of the song is so sort of unusual, and really bracing and immediate, that I sort of have that distinct memory. Sign of the Times, I also have a pretty clear memory of sort of hearing it in a car, over like a very bad car radio. This would have been, whenever it first came out. This was released in what, like 1987? 1987. So, car radios were, at least mine were not, I mean, it wasn't my car. I don't even think I knew how to drive at that point. But it was, sort of a poor fidelity car radio. And I was like, is this Prince, or is this sort of someone trying to sound like Prince? But then on listening more clearly, it was clear that it was Prince. And I was like, this sounds really, really unusual. And then, of course, listen to the song a few more times. The one thing there's many things that struck me about the song. Something that struck me about it that I don't know if anyone really would agree with me on this, or if anyone's ever said this before. But the line in the song when he goes, oh why, sign of the times, that part of the song,
Yep.
At least on first listen, that to me sounded like it was out of key. And to some extent it still does. I'm more inclined, having, heard the song so many more times, and also no one else having said this, to sort of think that it was intentional. But that's what I thought at the time. And I thought, this is really great, and I remember telling friends of mine, like in the punk rock community, because I was in a punk rock band at the time, saying like, okay, this is one of the cool things about Prince, is he will, deliberately, not fix things. Like if he makes mistakes in the recording process, a lot of the times he will leave them in. Now, like I say, I don't know if this really would qualify as a mistake. It does have a slight atonality to me, but that was sort of my first thought, was it was a mistake. And, there are, of course, many examples of this, including on the record Sign of the Times, where there were mistakes. And by the way, and I'll shut up after this, probably the most notable example of this, and I don't know if many people have talked about this, but the song I Hate You, I don't know if anyone's listened to that for a long time, but if you listen to it, he starts the guitar solo in entirely the wrong key. And he left that in. It's like a clear mistake. But so that was one of the things. I don't know if it was intended as a mistake, but the imperfections of his music is really notable. And I think it's fair to say that the song, even if that's not an imperfection, it does sound like a pretty imperfect song. It sounds rather dashed off, which is one of the things that's really great about it. And a lot of that music on Sign of the Times is sloppily recorded, but that's to the benefit of it, I think.
Yeah, I think overproduction was something that some people had been at the time kind of pointing to Prince after Parade. So Parade was a very produced album in many ways. Maybe, Kiss is fairly sparse, but there's a lot of like songs with the Clara Fisher Orchestra added, and some of the songs are really busy with a lot of sound effects and things. Not to say there isn't, because there's still quite a few sound effects in Sign of the Times. The Fairlight provided Prince an opportunity to add some new sound effects to his music, and so he took advantage of that for sure. But this is definitely a song that I would say falls into the category of kind of sparse production, and that I think Prince has even put it on record as saying, like, I just want the focus to be on the lyrics. How do I do that? By kind of stripping away a lot of the production techniques and bells and whistles that can sometimes bog down songs, not just Prince songs, songs in general that, are really intended to be super produced and glossy and what have you. That's not this song at all. So I definitely agree with that. All right, so thank you for sharing that, Alex. Laura, really kind of the same question, if you don't mind answering it yourself. What kind of memories do you have pertaining to Sign of the Times, if you want to share them? If not, you can always pass, but
no, I'll share. I mean, I don't have a specific memory, but I would gander a guess that I was likely in a bar dancing with an amaretto sour in my hand when I first heard this song, because I think I didn't hear so much Prince on the radio all the time. I was at that time I was going to school in a very small town in rural Iowa, and I had come, actually, Alex, this is something Jason and I have in common, is that we're from central Wisconsin, and I had come from, again, a very small rural town in central Wisconsin. So I'm pretty sure where I would have heard this was in a bar, in a club, dancing with friends. So that's where I would have heard Sign of the Times. But it is, to both of your points, it is that kind of stripped down funk that so many people just love from Prince, and a very topical song that I cannot wait to dive into, because it just feels so relevant right now. Just the I'm sure you both listened to or maybe you both listened to the podcast that the Prince Estate put out when Sign of the Times Deluxe came out, and it was excellent, hosted by Andrea Swenson of The Current. And on that podcast, Susanna Melvoin said that she was with Prince in Los Angeles when an earthquake hit. I think it was July 1986. And
yep.
Okay, I'm getting that story right. And he was so upset. I mean, it was such a disturbing, frightening experience. He was so upset that helped. That was kind of what spurred him to write Sign of the Times. And I think right now, we're sort of collectively in one of those moments, right, where it's just something bigger than all of us that's out of our control. This global pandemic that's so tragic just shakes you to your core. And then I think that there's another addition to the story where Susanna said Gilbert, his bodyguard, then brought in a newspaper, and there were headlines, AIDS, and the Challenger, all these things, and that was really what spurred the writing of Sign of the Times. So that's my memory. It's not as specific as Alex's, but I do like the thought of dancing in a club, drink in hand, to Sign of the Times.
Yeah, that's a kind of cool memory. I think, dancing to the song in the club. I don't know if some of the focus of the lyrics is really evident when you're, it's booming in the club and you're maybe not paying attention closely to what he's saying and just more about the beat. You probably picked up some stuff. It's hard to ignore and hard to miss. It's not like it's hidden. The social commentary is in your face, so it's impossible to miss if you're paying attention at all. But then again, in a club, sometimes you're not really paying attention to the to the lyrics of a song that you're listening to. So it might have been one of those songs where you heard it and, maybe took a few listens to kind of really grasp what was being said. I know it did for me, speaking for myself. So my story isn't that interesting or exciting either. It was definitely a song I heard on the radio. I mean, I was going to get to this, but I'll just mention it now. It was a pretty big hit. On the pop charts, it went to number 3, went to number 1 on the R&B charts. So it had a lot of success in the United States, at least, on the charts, despite its kind of heavy lyrical content and social commentary that was being used as the basis of the song's lyrics. And that's there had been songs that had done that before. I mean, I think it's kind of like an 80s update. I've seen it likened to, of course, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, or something by Stevie Wonder, Living for the City. I thought of those off the top of my head, and then when I just started doing some research, I realized I was not alone in that. I'd seen several people cite those two songs specifically as being kind of some previous examples of social commentary from like a pop artist or an R&B artist. So I think it did really well, and I heard it on the radio. The video is just a lyric video, which really wasn't much of a thing back then. I mean, MTV was in its boom, its heyday in the mid to late 80s. And so to put a video out there with very minimal production value, not putting Prince front and center, showing off his band or his dancers or whatever, that was kind of a risky move, I think. I mean, Prince's videos, in my opinion, take them or leave them in some cases. Some are very iconic and some are just like, oh, okay, I don't think you really spent a lot of time thinking about that. And one I think of off the top of my head is Paisley Park video. Interesting video, but I wouldn't say that it was anything that people were really clamoring for from Prince in 1985. And this is a very similar one. But again, with a lyric video, what are you focusing on? You're not being distracted by all the visual lights and interesting set designs and Prince himself. You're looking right at the lyrics. So hey, what do you want to know what the song's about? Let me show you. And I don't remember seeing it though. That's the thing. I don't really remember seeing the video. I remember seeing the video for "You Got the Look" a ton on MTV. That was all over the place. I heard Sign of Times on the radio. I never really remember seeing the video. So maybe it was one of those situations where MTV showed it a bit, but because it wasn't a popular video and it really didn't fit their programming designs, it probably didn't get the same amount of play as some more interesting videos like a Whitesnake video or something like that would have gotten at that time. So thank you both for sharing that. And yes, absolutely, Sunset Sound. That's where he recorded the song in 1986, in summer of '86. So I think, Laura, you kind of already started leading us down the path of talking about lyrics, so let's do it. The very first verse of the song goes, "In France, a skinny man died of a big disease with a little name. By chance, his girlfriend came across a needle, and soon she did the same. At home, there are 17-year-old boys, and their idea of fun is being in a gang called the Disciples, high on crack, toting a machine gun." Then he repeats time. That's the first verse, and wow, I mean, I think that very first line, "In France, a skinny man died of a big disease with a little name," is a really powerful, impactful, memorable first line for a Prince song, for any song, for any artist. What do you guys think about like that line specifically, or this verse generally?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking at this song because Jason, you and I have talked about other songs that have lyrics that are kind of open to interpretation, or evocative, and we get to sort of, debate what does this mean. Whereas I feel like Sign of the Times it's just so specific and intentional, right? Every word. And I think that's how the song opens. And, with a reference to the AIDS crisis and the way that, the disease was tragically spreading, inadvertently. And, also the problems with gangs and the gangster disciples, I think was the gang he's referring to. So we just, we open, it's almost like the curtain opens on this like dystopian picture of, the state of the Union.
Yep, exactly. That's like you had mentioned already, the headlines for the LA Times, that is cited as the inspiration that Susanna Melvoin had talked to Andrea about in the official Prince podcast. Those were right there, as you talked about. The AIDS crisis. Trying to find funding for, trying to develop a cure or any kind of medicine that could help people who were dying. And I think it was really progressive and kind of cool that Prince mentions this, and he mentions girlfriend came across the needle and soon she did the same, because what that does is that doesn't paint HIV and AIDS as only a gay disease, only affecting the gay community. It is indicating and maybe kind of teaching some people who were maybe a bit afraid of it, that there's other ways that you can contract the disease. And yeah, there had been some high profile cases of individuals that had contracted the disease through blood transfusions. So it was becoming more common knowledge, I would say, that it isn't just a gay disease as it might have been reported as early on. But to put that out there in a song really kind of puts a little more weight behind it, and also may teach some people something new. And I didn't realize that you could get HIV from sharing a needle if you're a drug addict, or even if you're just, like I said, in a hospital receiving a blood transfusion. So it's which also makes it a little more scary then too, because then it opens up the potential risk to a larger population. So I like that line. Alex, what are your thoughts on the first verse?
So, it's interesting. I guess my thoughts would be a little more sort of free form. I guess these lyrics are visceral. They are visceral. And I guess when I did hear it early on, they did have some impact on me. You brought up like living in the city and say Marvin Gaye, Inner City Blues. I would draw a complete contrast, or at least a pretty strong contrast, between this song and those songs in two respects. I mean, one is that those songs, they really, the narrator lives in the experience, essentially, of those songs. They're much more visceral to me than this is. It's interesting, to hear in the current about, he sort of read these headlines. To some extent, it sounds like he's writing what he read. And I don't mean to trivialize it at all, because again, I do, your point about the AIDS epidemic is fascinating, and I'd never really thought about that. And I think it's a really good point. But to me, like Sign of the Times as a song, like, I don't want to discount the value of the lyrics, that they're visceral and they're very different for Prince. But to me, the song exists. It's sort of like the way the music is really startling, and the way he delivers the lyrics and the vocal. I think it's a very, very skillful and interesting vocal performance. So if you put in sort of a hierarchy to me of what's interesting about this song, the top would be just the musical value of it, as a song in its totality. Second would be the vocal performance, and third would be the lyrics, which I think are still, very, very relevant and interesting for the reasons we discussed. But I would definitely draw a contrast between it and those other songs you mentioned. I also, although I'm open to being somewhat challenged on this, and I feel I already have been by your remarks, I don't find this song to be politically progressive, for reasons which we'll get into in a later verse. But I do find that, like Living in the City and Inner City Blues are born of, they're much more politically progressive, and they're born of a much more viscerally understood experience of the lyrics. Prince was immersed in his music, and, it's sort of like, to the extent current events were peeking their way in, it took a lot to have something impact him. And these events certainly did. And I don't mean to discount that when I heard this, you see the imagery of the Challenger, and you see, all of that. So I don't want to discount the value of the lyrics, but I guess those would be sort of some of my observations, which may be a little out of step with how some people think about this.
No, it's good insight, and it's I think it's interesting, your comment about that and how it compares to the songs from the 70s, because honestly, Prince was not living in an area where he had to worry about gang activity, right? I mean, that wasn't something that affected him personally, I don't think. I don't know this for a fact, but it seems unlikely that he was personally dealing with family members that were maybe living in rough parts of Minneapolis that were still affected by gang violence all around them, or having. So he might have had some experiences with that in the 70s growing up, but by 1987, not so much. And with the AIDS epidemic, I guess, I mean, anybody who was a sexually active person in the 80s had to kind of be aware of it and know that it could affect them if they were not taking precautions. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I don't know how much he was thinking about it as a personal risk to himself prior to, seeing this on the headlines and on the LA Times. I don't know if he was like, man, I really need to tone down my behavior. I'm at risk here. I have no idea, but just something to think about if he was or wasn't. Regardless, your point is valid, and I do appreciate that perspective as well. The only other thing I wanted to mention personally, and I'll open it up one more time to the both of you, is just, talking about the gangs. And again, it's 1987. This is really at the cusp of gangster rap, reality rap, whatever you want to call it. The Message by Grandmaster Flash and Melly Mel had been released a few years prior, but the gangster rap as we knew it to become, like the street reporter type hip hop and rap that was going to become very popular very soon, from your likes of Ice-T and NWA, Public Enemy. In 1986, when he was recording this, it really wasn't a genre, a subgenre of hip hop. It really wasn't. Ice-T cites Schoolie D's PSK What Does It Mean as being kind of like the very first gangster rap song. Ice-T's debut album came out in 87. So for Prince to be talking about gangs and gang violence, and even if it's just a line in a song, it's not a song that's dedicated to talking about and speaking about gang violence, but it's a line in a song, and it's a line in a song that is on a, released as a first single. It's not even buried, as a deep cut on an album. It's the opening track. It's the title song. For him to throw a line like that in this song, I think was fairly progressive. I can't think of too many pop songs that were really doing something like this and speaking about things like this at the time. And once again, I am not the expert on all genres of every music, so I'm sure somebody can think of an example of where that was done previously that maybe more effectively even, but I'm failing to come up with some examples. I'm certainly open to anybody challenging me on that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of progressive, I don't mean that. I was more referring to sort of the nature of the political statement. I don't think is progressive, but in sort of the sort of liberal / conservative meaning of the term progressive, as far as it being sort of more forward thinking in terms of making reference to these types of topics, I don't disagree at all. So you're the gangster rap stuff, the street reporting, you're absolutely right, was still yet to happen. I mean, I guess you could say The Message, the Grandmaster Flash song, The Message, but this was not, following in the footsteps of other musicians talking about this stuff. It was fairly brave and bracing to sort of come out in a lead single and be talking about these things. Absolutely. So if we're using progressive in the broader sense of sort of, was this, did it have an original quality to it? Absolutely. I think it's fair to credit the lyrics and the lyrical approach with having, a pretty strong degree of originality for a mainstream pop song. Absolutely, for the guy who, Purple Rain, a couple of years back, I mean, it was like a big growth from that as far as lyrical content. So I would say,
for sure,
I mean, if this song were written like after Straight Outta Compton was released, I wouldn't really be thinking about it. And so I think your point is extremely well taken, that it sort of preceded all of that.
Yeah, not by much, but just enough to kind of put Prince on the cutting edge in that regard. And he's just dipping his toes in it. It's not like this whole song is about, gang violence and really speaking to the whys behind it or getting real deep into the subject matter. But it's just, like I said, dipping his toes. All right, the second verse then, because he goes right into the next verse. He doesn't have a chorus yet at this point. Hurricane Annie ripped the ceiling off a church and killed everyone inside. You turn on the telly and every other story is telling you somebody died. My sister killed her baby because she couldn't afford to feed it, and we're sending people to the moon. In September, my cousin tried reefer for the very first time. Now he's doing horse. It's June. All right, so the next verse, it's kind of following the same pattern in terms of like just ripping from the headlines, singing about headlines from, and they don't have to even, in this case, I think they're even less specific than they were in the first verse. The first verse was more of like what Laura was talking about, the stuff he was seeing in the LA Times and back at his hometown newspaper about the gangster disciples. But the second verse is more generic, more general, it feels. What are your thoughts on that, Laura?
Well, I mean, I think you're right, Jason. This feels like just almost like the rhythm of the news cycle or something, right? Where it's just, okay, here's more and more and more coming at you, right? Just the unrelenting bad news. And I think, I'm curious, Alex, if this verse contains the lines that made you feel that this is maybe not progressive thinking. I mean, that's what occurred to me, that line, sister killed her baby because she couldn't afford to feed it. Now we're sending people to the moon. Well, I mean, that's not really a forward thinking comment. It reminds me of something, my grandfather would have said or whatever, it's not like, whoa, my mind is blown. I would never.
We hadn't sent anybody to the moon since 1972. I checked on that.
Okay, point taken. It was something your grandfather would say. Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is not earth-shattering thinking, I don't think, but it does feel to me, and I think it's also the rhythm, it just feels like boom, 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 like all this is just coming at you and you just don't get a break. And now there's a hurricane and then somebody died. And then that's what I get from it. It's almost like feels like piling on.
It does. He's piling on the shit, basically. Like, oh, you want to talk about AIDS and gang murders? Let's talk about hurricanes. Let's talk, natural disasters that nobody can really, control. We have no control over hurricanes and tornadoes and things of that nature. And poverty, just general poverty. He's talked about poverty before. I mean, a little bit in America from around the world in a day. He didn't talk about poverty and anti-Christian, but that's kind of like another early example of Prince doing ripped from the headlines style singing, songwriting. Alex, what about you? What do you think about it?
I would say again that this, it's very interesting singing, and even putting aside the individual lyrics, just sort of the overall cumulative effect is interesting in a number of ways. I mean, Laura's sort of comment about it being a dystopia, I think captures it well. But even sort of irrespective of the meaning of each individual line, just the overall impact as a listener is really, really powerful. And to me, it's not even necessarily like the literal meaning of the words, but sort of what they evoke. I'm probably wholly wrong about this, but the Hurricane Annie ripped the ceiling off the church, for me, evokes the Beatles song Eleanor Rigby, because there's a church and things like that. So I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but it sort of brought me to that. So I thought, but to Laura's point about, so I guess we get to the political progressive or not issue. So I wasn't thinking of that line in particular that Laura mentioned, but I do think that line is, it's relatively superficial. I don't want to be too hard on it, but it's not the most sheerly, it's probably, one of the least original sort of pieces of lyric in the song. The one that sort of I thought was unprogressive was my cousin tried reefer for the very first time. He's doing horse in June. I mean, I was for marijuana decriminalization then, as I am now, and it's been entirely proven that marijuana crime, laws disproportionately affect communities of color. And I consider, the notion of marijuana as a gateway drug then and now is an extremely retrograde political position. It's scientifically inaccurate, and it's like sort of ripped from the mouth of Ronald Reagan, basically. So that line, that to me was unprogressive, and that pretty much fit into, Around the World in a Day, America, the song America, essentially, again, being, ripped from Ronald Reagan, basically, in terms of communism, being this huge threat to the United States and things like that. So that's where it sort of, for me, evoked that. Again, not to be too hard on it, because I think that the song is fantastic, and I credit him for, I would say this, it's like we said at the beginning, it was very quickly created, this song. It's not like he labored over these lyrics in all likelihood. And I just totally credit the man for just throwing things out and trying new things. And maybe it all didn't necessarily work perfectly, but it's like he, as with so much else, he was doing something that other people weren't doing. So that's the overriding takeaway, even though I realize I'm being sort of nitpicky about a lot of this.
No, it's fine. And honestly, I wanted to offer another opinion on the line about my cousin tried reefer for the very first time. So I'm with you in terms of decriminalization of marijuana. I also agree with you on that in general. So, and with that said, I think a lot of times, not maybe in 1987, because I really didn't have an opinion on it. I was much too young to have an opinion on casual versus illicit drug use, and knowing the intricacies of how it affects Black communities or what have you. But since then, since I've become an adult, I listen to the song now, I think of it maybe a little different way, and it could be just because I want to think of it in a different way, because I don't want to believe that Prince was trying to connect the dots between casual drug use, marijuana use equals illicit drug use 9 months later. I never really wanted to believe that was what he was intending to say. Whether or not he was, that's not what I wanted to believe. So how I've always kind of interpreted that, and because he throws the months out there, I think the September to June is a really important piece of that, because I think one way you can interpret those lines is to think of how quickly a drug addiction can take hold, like an illicit drug addiction can take hold. And so somebody's just doing casual drugs, or just, whatever, partying, drinking, going out, having fun in September. But once you get a taste of, that drug, that, whether it's crack cocaine or if it's heroin or whatever it may be, it doesn't take long before that can really take hold of somebody and turn their life around in a negative way. And saying that it took less than a year, September to June, I think is a good way to think of it from that standpoint. If you're wanting an alternate take on those in that specific line, how quickly and how devastating it can be for somebody to become addicted to an illicit drug like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Does anybody have any thoughts on Hurricane Annie? Any interesting theories of why he called it Hurricane Annie?
Alex,
anybody?
I don't.
I got theories, but
yeah. Of course, there's anti-Christian, and that was, some say representing the Antichrist, and of course, ripping the ceiling off a church and killing everyone inside would follow along those lines. I don't know, but it also could have just flowed well. Alex, you've written songs, right? Sometimes words just flow well if you pop them in there. So, he could have said Camille or something too. Who knows? I don't know if it's worth reading a ton into Hurricane Annie being anti-Christian.
Yeah, whether or not it is or isn't, I just wanted to see if you guys had any interesting theories behind it or any thoughts behind it besides the obvious anti-Christian.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to, sort of what is emerging for me somewhat in this, that, most of Prince's songs, I think the lyrics are somewhat impressionistic, at least in part. And I think Laura's absolutely right. The phrase Hurricane Annie just sort of sounded interesting coming off the tongue. It is an interesting line, right? Again, the way these lyrics are strung together in these, sort of lines where there's a lot of words stuffed in each line is just very, very interesting to me. Words are like, as a writer, you choose a word, you labor over a particular line and, for an interesting word. I used to be in a poetry class a long time ago with this like really, sort of high level poet teaching the class. People would circulate their poems around and there'd be a lot of critiques. And at one point, someone said, "Oh, this is an interesting word in this poem." And the teacher would say, "Look, if you write a poem and you came up with one interesting word, that's good. In other words, if we agree as a class that your whole poem is a fucking piece of shit, but there's one good word, that is a triumph of sorts." And in the word, Hurricane Annie is an interesting phrase. And there's many, many interesting phrases in this song, which in some cases have a political meaning or a current event meaning. But I think he's selecting them much more for their value as words. Disciples is an interesting word. So I think, it's like there's plenty of articles about gang violence and, a strength of this song compared to something like Living in the City. Sure, it's not as politically trenchant, but it's like those songs are so literal. Using the word disciples is sort of somewhat irrelevant to the topic, but it's an interesting word. It's an interesting sound. So it's like he's choosing the words for their sort of oral quality. And again, I think that's really, really commendable. And that's a hallmark of his whole career. But it's interesting that he does that in this song, even though many people are sort of saying, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? He's making this big political statement. He did something valuable here by talking about these issues, but I don't think it's, I still think what's interesting to me is the artistic nature of it rather than sort of, the reportage aspect of it, not to discount that.
Fair point. I would be remiss if I did not mention there is a song by Rudy Ray Moore. It's super raunchy. It's called Hurricane Annie Meets Dolomite. It's from the 70s. That's when Rudy Ray Moore was doing his uber raunchy music. And yeah, that's a song. So whether or not that's a callback to that, the two songs couldn't be any less alike in terms of content, tone, what have you. So it might just be a coincidence, but I had at least bring it up. Okay, let's move on then, because we finally reached the chorus. The song's chorus is, "It's silly, no, when a rocket ship explodes and everybody still wants to fly. Some say a man ain't happy unless a man truly dies. Oh, why? Time." So it repeats time twice. Okay, so the chorus, obviously all of us are old enough to remember the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion from January of 1986, which I feel like is a pretty straightforward reference in the when a rocket ship explodes. Recorded only less than 6 months later. It's still going to be on his mind and on the public consciousness mind. Just because it's interesting kind of to talk to people who were also alive at that time. I would have been in 5th grade, and like a lot of school children at that age, we were watching it on television and saw the whole thing. Very memorable and kind of like a common touchstone for Generation Xers. Anything that you guys wanted to share in regards to Space Shuttle Challenger's explosion from January of 86? Any memories of that?
Yeah, I remember where I was too. As Alex said, when these tragedies occur, it's almost frozen in your mind. And I was at home at my parents' house and on a break from college and saw it on the television in our library. I remember it vividly, and it was so gut-wrenching because it was a teacher, and there were many teachers who wanted to right, have Kristen McAuliffe's place on that flight. So yeah, it's tragic, but I think, this is an interesting line from Prince. It feels kind of un-Prince-like to me. I mean, because the idea that, yeah, rocket ship exploded, and isn't it silly that people still want to fly? That feels the opposite of a typical Prince line. It's got a real negative, cynical tone to it. Like,
Yeah.
Why would you want to take a risk? And this is coming from Prince.
Yeah.
It just
Good point.
doesn't jive in my mind. This guy,
Yeah.
who's known for being fearless and risk taking. So
It's very, very conservative. Very conservative. You're right.
very conservative. Yeah, that's really what, and then, this, some say a man ain't happy unless a man truly dies. That's got religious connotations, doesn't it? I feel like that is, definitely evocative of the Bible in some ways, that you're not really free from sin until death. I mean, it's just the human condition. So, I feel like he may be bringing a little religion into this whole thing at this point.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I get from it as well. I don't know if Alex, you have anything else you wanted to add to the chorus discussion?
I mean, this Sign of the Times, I think you could fairly describe as a signature Prince composition. I mean, I think it's, probably would easily make my top 20, top 15, maybe not top 10, but top 15 is strong, strong company indeed. So I think it's a signature composition. What I'm hearing, is the music again. I mean, the song builds in a really, really nice way. It starts out very quiet and sort of builds up. And there's just the guitar stuff in this chorus kind of clashes against everything else. And there's some sort of like weird synth texture. It's just like, it's musically very, very unusual, which is to me like my major relationship with Prince is just like hearing things that I had not heard musically before. And this was one of them, this is one of them. And, it's like, this is an unusual piece of music. Great mad credit for that. And that's why it's in the top 15. It's not in the top 15 because of this line, which, but again, it's like he was doing things with rapidity. He wasn't laboring over lyrics. If we want to compare it to Eleanor Rigby, I mean, it's like that sounds like it was labored over for weeks. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But yeah, it's not an interesting lyric to me particularly. The political stuff again. I mean, Prince is not a progressive dude. I mean, he became, he sort of at the towards the end of his life. He started doing songs like Baltimore and started digging into Black Lives Matter. And it would have been amazing to see where he went with that. And of course, Black Muse and everything. So it's like he started moving in that direction, but he had this whole swath of time, with Larry Graham and all that, where he was espouting, basically, a really retrograde approach. And you see little hints of that here and there in some of this stuff, like with the line with the reefer and notwithstanding, I think, Jason, you really make fascinating points to the contrary. But I guess the overall ambiance, I would agree with Laura that sort of it clunks for me, sort of, oh, the ship blows up and now why is everyone so foolish to want to continue with the space program? It doesn't land with me. So, but the music lands with me. It's still a great, great song, but not because of that line.
That's all good. It's all good. If we can't critique it, what are we doing, right? I mean, we're not here just to fawn over every single song Prince has made. So, I'm with you on that. So the third verse, Prince does something different, as he often does in his third verses. Takes kind of a different lyrical approach, and he's no longer just like ripping things from the headlines. I mean, he is in a way, but not in the same way that he had been in the first couple of verses. So then he goes into the next lines. Baby make a speech, Star Wars fly, neighbors just shine it on. But if a night falls and a bomb falls, will anybody see the dawn? Time. And it seems like he's almost like retreating back or hearkening back to some of his old Cold War fears that he was expressing on the Controversy album in 1999, talking about those here with Night Falls and a Bomb Falls, kind of going back to that whole fear of nuclear apocalypse, fear of nuclear war, fear of attack from foreign invaders. So I think it's just a little more of the same kind of similar stuff that he's spoken about before, just to keep going with the themes of everything's shitty right now. And here's some examples of things that are still shitty. We still are technically in Cold War with Russia in 1987. It's, starting to thaw out a little bit, but, it wasn't. And, of course, the Star Wars missile defense program referenced there, Star Wars fly. I don't know what he's trying to say with Baby Make a Speech. I don't know if it's important or not, but opening it up to either of you if you have any additional insights you had for this section of lines.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that did seem a little bit interesting to me was just the phrase will anybody see the dawn? And I started thinking, when was the earliest reference to that phrase? I mean, Prince, of course, goes on to say, welcome to the dawn. And, that becomes a real frequently used line. And I can't remember what the first time was when he referenced to see the dawn. Was that 1999 or?
I remember specifically Purple Rain, May You Live to See the Dawn was in the liner notes.
Okay, yes.
I don't know if that was the first, though, but that was definitely the first time I remember seeing it.
Right. Not in the lyrics, but
the liner
notes.
Exactly. Yeah, it was liner notes only at that point. So I don't know if it's the first reference to the dawn as a concept in a Prince lyric. I honestly don't recall. Alex, anything from you?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, so this line, when the night falls, when a bomb falls, will anybody see the dawn? I mean, to me, that's beautiful lyrics. That is just incredibly interesting writing, architecturally just really well created. And it comes at sort of this really important point of the song. And the music sort of drops away, dan, dan, will anybody see the dawn? And there's basically nothing but his voice there. Will anybody see the dawn? And it's just really like powerful, evocative line. And then the drums and everything kick back in. So it's just like really, really skillful songwriting. And, to me, that's probably the most evocative line in the song. When the night falls and a bomb falls, will anybody see the dawn? I mean, it just like really, really works well. So I think that's beautiful. And I guess not coincidentally, that's the least sort of topical part of it. And sort of like if someone heard those three lines or whatever, it doesn't sound all that topically limited to like 1980s developments. Certainly the reference to Star Wars is completely time limited. I don't have any great grievance with it. I mean, it's sort of cool that he was referencing it, but those other three lines are just more universal.
Yeah. Good. Very, very good point. Very good point. So at that point, then he goes into the chorus again, which has identical lyrics, but the difference between the performance of this chorus and the previous time goes back to Alex when you were referencing the oh, why, and he stretches that out, and it kind of sounds like it's a little out of tune, his singing, and that's what happens in this chorus, the singing of this chorus. But from a lyrical standpoint, nothing's different, really, just how he performs it. And then we are brought to the outro, and the outro it's the end of the song if you're listening to, like, the radio edit, but there's another, like, whole minute plus of music after he's done with the lyrics here in this outro. So it's outro in terms of like only the last grouping of lyrics or section of new lyrics. And they are: sign of the times, mess with your mind. Hurry before it's too late. Let's fall in love, get married, have a baby. We'll call him Nate if it's a boy. So Alex, with the outro, the lines here, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What do you find interesting about what he's saying here at the end?
So it's very loopy and goofy, and it's very Prince. You know, it's like, who else would say this? It's sort of, it almost defies analysis. But you know, let's call him Nate if he's a boy. I mean, it's like, it's so opaque and sort of funny and inscrutable, and in that sense, it's very, very Prince. And that makes it great. And you know, from there we go into the instrumental outro. You know, in the longer version, where some, you know, the guitar work there is on par with anything he's done. You know, the sort of little licks he does, and the sort of percussive stuff, and it's like simple, you know, in the sense that the licks are not hard for a lay person to play, but they're very, just very deeply felt in their execution. So to me, it's like, and I know we're mainly talking about the lyrics, but the stuff you get to shortly after the lyrics end is like absolutely indelible as far as, you know, like music of our time. You know, the whole song is, but those passages for me with the guitar stuff are just, you know, where much of the legacy I would hang for this song.
Thank you. Good point. Laura, any comments from you?
You know, there is so much in this outro that I love. I love that, you know, during the song he's singing time over and over again, right? And then all of a sudden you get to this outro where it's like this rush of, you know, okay, hurry before it's too late. And you have this kind of pressing feeling during the song, and finally it kind of comes to fruition. And, you know, unlike, let's say, 1999, right, where Prince is advocating for, you know, okay, we're facing the end of the world, let's have this, you know, hedonistic reaction to it, right? We're going to party, but here it's so unexpected that in the face of, you know, Star Wars and, you know, what if a bomb falls? Will anyone see the dawn? Instead, now he wants to get married and have a baby. And that, to me, it was so unexpected from Prince, right? And then we'll call him Nate if it's a boy. All right, that was like Alex said, that's just classic Prince. So I love the outro. That's actually my favorite part of the song. So it just takes such an interesting turn for me.
Yeah, I think anybody singing along with the song and enjoys it is going to at least say, if it's a boy, you know, or call him Nate if it's, you know, the dramatic pause if it's a boy. Everybody does that. I mean, how can you not? It's impossible not to kind of join him with that statement, because it's so quirky and very Prince-like in that way. I like the fact that he talks about not much time, and it's not necessarily because I think it's like you know, a really I mean, it's interesting, but it's not new. It's not something he hasn't done before. And I remember distinctly at the end of the B-side God, he's talking about, hurry, there isn't much time. Dance to Dance Electric, there isn't much time. So he's been commenting that we don't have much time for quite some time. I mean, he's talking about a little time we have in 1999 and the end of God, like as I mentioned, and you know, I'm sure countless examples that I just don't have at the tip of my tongue right now. And so he's doing the same thing here. We don't have much time. So I'm assuming he's saying we don't have much time. Let's hurry up, get married, have a baby, and raise our family while the earth is still here, while, you know, society hasn't completely broken down to the point where it's unsafe to raise children or have a family anymore. I mean, I don't know, but that's kind of the imagery one gets when you're hearing him say, hurry, there's not much time, after singing all about this stuff that's going on in the world. You wonder, like, if he's thinking like the AIDS epidemic is going to be the end of humanity. Is it going to be so? Because I think there's still a lot. 1987, there's a lot of question marks. How do you get it? Can you get it from just touching surfaces, you know, in bathrooms and whatnot? And if it's that easy to get and it can kill you, then what's going to happen to us? Are we going to be able to, you know, live through this? And now living through another pandemic, I'm sure there were a lot of fears, similar fears to that at the very beginning of this pandemic. You know, do we have much time? I don't know. There's still a lot of question marks, and he was expressing that, I think, in these lines. And also just making it really about, bringing it back home personally. Like, all of these lyrics up to this point have been a little bit impersonal. He's like reading headlines. Just, this is what's going on, people. Here's the mirror that I'm holding up to society. But this outro, he's making it very personal by talking about raising a family and getting married and having a kid in the wake of everything that's going on, and in spite of everything that's going on. That is just it's just interesting to me. It's interesting that he would take that approach as opposed to just curling up in a ball and saying I give up, which is not what he's saying here. So that's kind of why I like it, as well as, like I said, the quirkiness about the lines and how he delivers them. So,
yeah, great points, Jason. Yeah, fascinating. It's really been interesting to hear both of your perspectives. I feel like, Laura and I, as people who wrote a book together, one of the reasons it worked so well is we think like extremely similarly, not without differences that sort of complemented one another. But I feel so I'm not surprised that there's not like this great divergence in things we've said, but I feel like you, Jason, have brought perspectives that I really would not have thought of at all, because you're sort of like, to some extent, like disagreeing with things I've said, not in some sort of impolite way, but just in a way that's like made it much more interesting. Because the things you've brought up, sort of politely disagreeing, just have made me think twice about my own preconceptions of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it's all about. And that's really why I have guests on my show. I could just do this by myself and offer takes. And I've done it before for songs that I really didn't think had, a lot of depth to them, and it really coming up with alternate takes for a love song maybe isn't super interesting, but, or, like a very simple song. But a song like Sign of the Times, I feel like you need to have differing opinions out there, because one person's take could be completely different from somebody else's, and to put that out there. And I'm just a dude, I'm just a Prince fan, just putting out a podcast. So I like the fact that we've been able to have this discussion and offer different takes, because I've certainly been opened up to new ways of thinking about the song too. It doesn't mean I'm going to change my way of thinking, but I do appreciate what the both of you have had to offer in discussing the song with me. So thank you so much for that, and hopefully people will get something out of it as well.
Well, I doubt that.
Thank you.
But
well, that's always the hope, Alex. That's always the hope.
Let's not get out of ourselves.
Song.
It really is.
Yeah. Musically fascinating, in spite of its kind of sparse production. Still musically fascinating, musically interesting in a way that you wouldn't expect a Prince song necessarily to be, at least not 1987 Prince. So any final thoughts from either of you before we close this out?
The title of the song is great. Sign of the Times is a very interesting phrase. It's a widely used phrase, but it fits really well. It's an interesting phrase. There's a pretty well-known Petula Clark song called "Sign of the Times." I don't know if you knew about that, but it's it's a cool title. It's a very cool title for a song and an album. So I think it was a great idea to call the album "Sign of the Times" as well, even though that wasn't really his first choice. We wanted to have Crystal Ball, but it's a cool title.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a cool title. And, Erica Thompson, the writer from Columbus, Ohio, who's writing a book about Prince's spiritual journey, had unearthed on her blog, I think it was last year, the fact that the Seventh-day Adventists magazine that had been published since, I don't know, the 1870s is called Sign of the Time, I think, just not Times. So, we can never say for sure that something influenced Prince or didn't, but he was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist. And,
right.
It's very possible that this magazine, was something he saw at church, or that, his parents maybe, took the subscription and got it at home. And, as you said, Alex, it's just a great title. It's very interesting that, it wasn't written as a title track per se, but it became the title track in all the different permutations that it took to get to the Sign of the Times album that we know now. But it works, and it's a great title, and it's again, it's not maybe some of Prince's most deep lyrics, or I think it's all pretty much just face value kind of lyrics, but Alex has done a great job of sort of bringing in the musical side of it as well, because I think there's a lot to appreciate there. And I'll always love, we'll call him Nate if it's a boy. So.
Yep, agreed. Well, okay. I think then we'll close it out here. I wanted to thank you again, both of you, for joining me. Alex, as a first-time guest, thank you so much. Laura, for suggesting that Alex join us. That was amazing. I appreciate that, and I always appreciate you being on my show, as always. Maybe I'll give you both a chance to, again, speak to what you're up to, or maybe it's just from a social media standpoint, and we can edit some of this out if you don't have anything. Laura, I know you've got a Facebook page, and Alex, didn't you say you did as well, that you want to maybe reiterate this point?
Yeah, sure. So the group is called Make the House Shake in Facebook. So if you want to search that, it should have some updates on stuff that I'm doing, including an upcoming book project.
Great. Got it. Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, you can follow me at lauratiebert.com. Please come on over and put your email in and get on my newsletter list. We are launching a class on June 7th. We start an online course in how to live like Prince, and it's called What Would Prince Do? And if you sign up for the newsletter, you get a freebie that asks, what are Prince's top 3 habits and which one will change your life. So, and you'll also get a coupon for a discount to the course. So we start June 7th, and we're going to be living like Prince this summer.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I have been your host, Jason Brenninger. This has been the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. You can find me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Press Rewind Pod. And I also have a Discord. So please, if you're into Discord, it's a conversational app where you can have real-time conversations with other listeners of the podcast, or just other Prince fans in general that have joined the Discord server. And you can find that link on all of my social media profiles. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.